So, as the president of the Hockessin Historical Society, I welcome and thank you all for attending our second annual Juneteenth guest speaker event. Last year, we focused on a couple of events that were really mostly about Juneteenth, and those events happened in Texas, and it was a little, not really local history, and I said to Darlene, let's get some more local history for the next talk. So this event actually has to deal with events that happened within about 2 miles of this building, and actually even closer than that. So, it'll be a very interesting and local type of discussion this time. Anybody here who are Hockessin Historical Society members? Any of you? Hey, thank you. Thank you for being a member. We have about 50 new members this year, which is great. So that's up from a very few in the previous years, and that had to do with many circumstances. But we haven't had any real meetings yet with our group, and we're looking to ramp up our organization to be able to do more programs like this and provide other things for the public also, and work on our museum and build many other aspects of the historical society that we try to provide for the public. And if you're interested in becoming a member, there are membership forms on the back table. Please take one for yourself and one for your neighbor, sign up, and any new members, every single person that becomes a member is one more person that gives us credit when it comes time to get grant funding. So it really, really looks good when you can say you have X number of members. So if you have 20 members, that's okay. If you have 500 members, that really looks like a strong organization. So we're leaning towards having more and more members in the future, and hopefully more volunteers also to help with the many aspects of what we do. How many of you learned about Brown versus Board of Education growing up in school? Show of hands. If your hand doesn't go up, you didn't grow up in the United States and you never had learned history, or you were sleeping. Maybe you were sleeping, but almost everybody has at least heard about it. And the interesting thing is that there's not enough time in school to learn about all the details that are involved with these types of events and the history of the United States. So it's no fault of the educational system or teachers. There's just so much vast amounts of history. So we don't fault anybody for that. And it's events like these that allow us to educate the general public on the important details of those larger types of topics that we have in our entire society. How many of you then have heard of Shirley Bula? Show of hands. You guys are all lying to me. Okay, maybe about half of you. So Shirley Bula is the integral part that actually had to deal with why the school system changed. And I won't get into the details because that's for our guest speakers. But there's basically 3 buildings of significance that are involved with this. The first is Schoolhouse 107C. So if you all got up out of your seats and started walking out the back door and just went straight, you would be on Mill Creek Road, and in about a block, you would end up at Hockessin Colored School 107C, which was very integral in this entire topic that we're talking about. The other building is the White School. So that was Hockessin School number 29. And if you went out the door and you turned left and you went up the hill about 2 blocks, you would be at Schoolhouse Road, and the building is now the Sycamore Hill Church, but the building is still there, and maybe that building also deserves a historic marker in the future, because it is really pretty historic and involves the topic also. And the last place was Fred Beulah's house, which is where Shirley grew up, and the building is no longer there, but we are working on getting a historic marker to signify the significance of that site. And that was located at Limestone Road and Valley Road. And it was just a little bit north of that intersection on Limestone Road, right across from the Tweeds Tavern Complex. And the house is no longer there, but the significance is strong enough that we should be able to get a historic marker. The funding is there thanks to Representative Mike Smith, and I think our other representatives will all back us on that also. And we hope to have a ceremony for that this fall. The wording is getting a little tricky, and people want more words in there than the public archives wants to put on the marker. So that's something that's going to be debated and should be able to be worked out fairly soon. Special thanks to the Hockessin Fire Department for providing us with this space for this event. It's really great that we have this beautiful building in Hockessin to use, and it's available for rentals also. So if you want to have a wedding here, it's already set up. you can hang from the chandelier maybe, and you know, it's a pretty beautiful building. And they have really nice types of modern things like these microphones and stuff, so it's pretty cool. We also do a lot of events also at the Hockessin Library, and our buildings are a little less equipped, but we also have space available for public group meetings and nonprofit groups to use at our buildings over at Tweets Complex and also Lambourne Library. And I'd also like to thank our elected officials. Without them, we wouldn't be in the situation we are. They really support us. So it's all of our local elected officials. And I think, when I think of politics, it reminds me of my parents when they used to say, who's running for president? And one parent would say, oh no, I don't like that person. And the other parent would say, oh no, I don't like that person. So one of my parents was Republican, the other one was Democrat, and you know, that was my memory of growing up with politicians. And so now having to work with our local elected officials, I can't thank them enough. They are so supportive of our group, and it's them who really support us. And it's not just financially, it's whenever we have issues that come up that I can just call them or send them an email, and they get right back to me and send me a page full of information on what I need to do to solve the problem. So especially Janet Kilpatrick, hey, thank you, Janet. So, and last year we had County Executive Matt Meyer here also, and he's here again tonight, which is great. And he provided us with a proclamation last year, and I think he's doing the same thing again tonight. So it's great to have him, and we appreciate having you here and supporting our organization also. It's just great to have the overwhelming support of our elected officials. So I think we're ready to have that done, and then we'll get right into the guest speakers, and we'll do, each guest speaker maybe has half an hour, 45 minutes, followed by maybe a little question and answer if you have any questions for them. But welcome, Matt Meyer. Thank you.
Let's hear it for Pete Seeley and the Hockessin Historical Society. Thank you so much. I know we're all here to hear Dr. Skelcher and Sonny, so I will keep it brief. I wanted to make sure to reiterate the compliments for both Councilwoman Kilpatrick and Representative Mike Smith. Without their leadership and generosity, we probably wouldn't be here tonight, so thank you both. Yes, give them a round of applause. I also want to highlight, in addition to Sonny, I see David Wilk here with the Friends of Hockessin Colored School 107C. I don't know if there are any other friends here. David?
Hi, Miss Lois Johnson.
Miss Lois Johnson is also here, an alum of the school, right? It's great to see. I hope everyone here knows the exciting work being done over at the school, and that's really thanks to the work of these three individuals, as well as Representative Smith, Janet Kilpatrick, and so many others. Thank you so much, Pete, and Historical Society members for doing this. My one quick Juneteenth question before I read this proclamation. Juneteenth freed the slaves in all the Confederate states, and after Juneteenth, June 19th, 1865, there were still 2 states in the country where slaves were still not free. There were still 2 states in the country where after Juneteenth, slaves were still not free. Does anyone know what those 2 states were?
Delaware.
And?
Kentucky.
Kentucky. Was that? Wow. That's impressive. Very impressive. Vince Loafing. Former state rep Vince Loafing. Kentucky and Delaware. Does anyone know when those individuals were free legally? It was about 6 months later, in December 6th, 1865, when the country ratified the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, which made slavery illegal. So it's a little strange for me to stand up on Juneteenth in the state of Delaware to proclaim, this month, Juneteenth, or June 19th, Juneteenth, obviously important for the nation, though it didn't have much legal effect here in Delaware. So be it hereby known to all that I, as county executive, recognize Juneteenth, June 19th, 2022, whereas President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation on New Year's Day, 1863. declaring that all enslaved people be freed, and whereas on June 19th, 1865, 2.5 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, Union soldiers traveled to Galveston, Texas, where the last enslaved African Americans lived, and shared the delayed news that the Civil War had ended and that those enslaved were free. And whereas Juneteenth commemorates the emancipation of the last African Americans in the United States, except for Kentucky and Delaware. It is a yearly celebration of freedom and African American culture. And whereas Delaware's Juneteenth celebration especially honors and remembers Shirley Beulah and the Beulah family, as well as all students of Hockessin Colored School 107C for their contributions towards the Brown v. Board of Education decision that changed our nation. And whereas Shirley was adopted by the Beulah family, Fred and Sarah, in 1945, after being found abandoned in an apartment building in Wilmington. Is that right? I didn't know that. Whereas for grade school, Shirley's parents drove her to the black school, named the Hockessin Colored School 107C. By the time she was 8 years old, her parents grew tired of driving her 2 miles to Hockessin when each day a bus went right by their home on its way to a far better white school. And whereas in 1951, with the help of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the Beulah family sued their daughter to be able to ride the bus closer to their home and asked the state court for admission to the white school. Shirley was granted admission to the local school upon winning the case, marking this the first instance of a segregated white public school being ordered by an American court to admit black children in our country's history. Now therefore, I, as County Executive of Newcastle County, by virtue of the authority vested in me, do hereby proclaim June 19, 2022 as Juneteenth in Newcastle County to honor Shirley Beulah, her family, and all the students of Hockessin Colored School 107C. I commend Pete and the Hockessin Historical Society for coordinating this informative Juneteenth event to educate county residents on the holiday's history and continued importance in today's world. Thank you all for coming tonight.
And actually, who is more responsible for setting this up than me is Darlene. Darlene Amobi deserves all the credit. She's the one who arranged the county grant, set up the and got the guest speakers. So it's Darlene who is really responsible for this whole thing. All I did was make the handout for you guys for tonight and help a little bit with advertising.
I'd like to know if there's anyone in our audience that might be related to Shirley Beulah. Would you please stand? Okay. Why don't you give us your name and tell us how you're related? Go ahead.
Thank you. And thank you for all being here. First of all, what I want to say to you is forgive me for the way I'm talking. I actually was diagnosed with tongue cancer a few months ago. And so I had surgery and I'm recovering. But my name is Renee Michelle Rick Stamps, and I am the daughter of Shirley Beulah's name. And we truly thank you for being here and supporting my mother so intensely. And hopefully we can all get involved and, make this room full. I'm like, we're fighting. Hold up, there's some names. But this is also my daughter right here. I'll let her introduce herself.
My name is Mercedes Traffic. I am Renee Stamps. Third child, actually. Great. And then so I actually have 6 kids of my own. So we're learning a lot about my grandmother, and I'm just here to support and learn and pick all of you guys' brains and figure out, who actually went to school with her and, things that we won't be able to know in a book. So that's why I decided to come and bring my children to also make sure you guys know what we are.
My name is Kalani Evans. This is my grandma. My mom and my great grandma is Shirley. And I actually, in a little bit, I'm about to do I wrote an essay because I'm from Colorado, and I had a final, and we had to do a paper, and I did the Brown versus Board of Education, and I wrote a whole paper about it, what I'm about to read to y'all. But y'all will get to hear that a little bit.
Okay, well, why don't you come on up? And it also, I don't know if you caught what she just said. I was talking to her mother yesterday in Denver, Colorado. They hopped a plane and got here overnight.
Okay, so the question I had to answer was, does racial segregation of public schools violate the USA Constitution? I wrote, in the United States, many students, mostly southern states, had black and whites go to separate schools. In the 1950s, there was a lot of segregation in public schools. They had African American children walking miles to a black school, even when an all-American school was just a couple of blocks away from them. But they couldn't go to the school because of their race. In Topeka, Kansas, 7-year-old named Linda Brown had to walk dangerous 6 blocks just to go to a black school every day. When there was a school just less than 4 blocks from her house she could have gone to. Linda's father, Oliver Brown, tries to attend an all-white school, but they denied his request quickly because she was black. It was an all-white school. Her father became very angry. It wasn't fair to Linda Brown. She had to begin her journey at 6 a.m. to be in class at 9 a.m. and walk all through the railroads knowing there was a school closer. So Oliver Brown joined the NAACP. The NAACP was the National Association for Advancement of Colored People. It was formed by a group of black and whites that had gathered in 1909 to end racial discrimination and fight for civil rights. NAACP had its sightings on accomplishing integration, but focused on fighting for fair trials for black defendants and ending lynching. Black parents started enrolling their kids in white schools, knowing that the schools they were going to turn them down. But the rejection started to become more biased of test case against Board of Education. So they also joined the NAACP. The NAACP needed to find students and parents prepared to lend their name against the case against school segregation. So Oliver Brown is said to be the head of the list plaintiffs in the case. So it became Brown versus Board of Education. Racial segregation in public schools violates the USA Constitution because it violates the 14th Amendment, so it's unconstitutional, and they were harming black kids and their education. During the Brown versus Board, the civil rights movement was also happening in the 1950s. In the civil rights movement, there were massive protests against discrimination and racial segregation. It also guaranteed the 14th and 15th Amendment. In a rural community in Hockessin, Sarah Bruley had a problem with segregation. Sarah Bruley had a 10-year-old daughter whose name was Shirley Bruley. They had to drive 2 miles every day to one-room schoolhouse for only black kids. Sarah had to do this every day because there was no bus for kids, only white kids allowed to ride the bus. But there was a bus that passed the Bruley's home. It only had white kids in there. Sarah Bruley got tired of driving Shirley to school, so she took it into her own hands and went to ask the school officials if her daughter could ride with the white students on the bus. She also pointed out that black students should also be able to ride the bus, not just white kids. But the local authorities had turned her down. Sarah did not stop. She went to the government and state officials about her case. But because of segregation, they said to Bruley that colored people students aren't allowed to ride the bus. It's only for white students. Sarah really still wasn't letting us go, so she went to Willington lawyers, to Louis Redding, and she asked him for legal advice. In Delaware, Redding is the first black lawyer to practice in the city. He had won many classes for black college students. For many years, black kids weren't allowed to go to college, so for the first time, he had made the University of Delaware accepted the black students. Mr. Redding was also part of the NAACP team, so he and the leader of the NAACP team fought against Burley case and segregation in white public schools. It was their real victory in their campaign of getting rid of segregation. But they didn't stop there. They started winning other cases in states that related to Brown versus Board of Education. Although some people think racial segregation in public schools should be in favor, many people argue that schools should desegregate in public schools. Racial segregation was violating the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment grants equal rights and citizenship. It also gives illegal rights to African Americans. Also, no state is allowed to make or apply any laws that shorten privileges. African Americans have gotten treated differently and poorly because of the color of their skin. In many states, there were laws that had public facilities separating black people and white people because black people weren't allowed to be on the same bus, restaurants, schools, and restaurants as white people. And because of this, separating black people wasn't getting treated equal. Black kids were getting harmed by racial segregation in public schools. White people are basically saying or teaching African American that they are second-class citizens to white kids. African Americans during the time had less equality education because in white schools they had everything better. Better restrooms, better looks. White kids had even better opportunities. Black kids had to teach in run-down school shacks that usually don't have electricity, running water, or books to even learn with. The teachers weren't even getting paid, and they were undereducated themselves. White people even had two high schools, one for girls and one for boys, but black students weren't even allowed to go to high schools, so black students had to enroll in a black college to get their high school diploma and then graduate. The sad thing was the states would spend over $1 million in a white school, but on spending less than $500,000 on black school. And to this day, it gets only worse. For the concept of separate but equal in the South, black and white schools were anything and everything besides equal. In the end, racial segregation in public schools violate the USA Constitution because it violates the 14th Amendment and was harming black kids and their education.
Thank you so much. We enjoyed that. I'm going to introduce our first speaker now. That's going to be Dr. Bradley Skelcher, and I just want to tell you a little bit about him. For one thing, he retired from Delaware State University in 2017 after 28 years at the institution. My God. He joined the faculty in 1990. He had many jobs at Delaware State. While at Delaware State, he was a professor of history, director of, the graduate program in historical preservation, dean of the College of Arts, Humanities, Social Sciences, and he was also associate provost. When he retired, he was honored with the permanent title of Professor Emeritus. Dr. Skelcher.
I have little present. Takes a. Hello? Is it on? Okay. I'm kind of used to feedback, so I was chatting a little bit beforehand regarding Shirley Beulah while we're waiting for the machine to warm up. And I had the pleasure of knowing Shirley Beulah Stamps. When I was at Delaware State University, I put together a conference on the 50th anniversary of Brown v. Board. And we honored Shirley Beulah. She attended, and we honored her at the conference. And we had individuals who participated in the desegregation of education. I spent a lot of time in China. This is Nanjing and the Blue Mountains. First of all, I want to thank the Historical Society of Hockessin for inviting me to speak, and all the visitors here. Oh my. Okay. For inviting me here today and to speak about who I consider Delaware great, and that's Shirley Beulah Stamps. The New York Times reported in its obituary for the Reverend Shirley Beulah Stamps that she had died on Wednesday in Wilmington, Delaware, on June 4th, 2003. It wrote that her parents fought for her to ride a school bus, which became a part of the 1954 Supreme Court case that ended school segregation. She was 59. The cause was a heart attack, the Times reported. As we've heard today, Shirley was abandoned in a public space not far from the Wilmington train station when she was about 10 months old. Sarah Beulah read about her story and was so moved by it that she decided to adopt her. And she named her Shirley Barbara. The Beulahs now had 9 children, 8 from Sarah's husband Fred's previous marriage. Shirley Beulah was 8, as we've heard, when her parents, Fred and Sarah, decided to petition the state for a bus to take her 2 miles to her black school in Hockessin. Each day, as we've heard, a bus went right by their home on its way to the white school. In 1951, after failing to secure her a ride on a white bus to take her to a black school, and with the help of the NAACP, the Beulahs sued not just for a bus ride, they also asked the state about for her admission into the white primary school. They won, and for the first time, a segregated white public primary school was ordered by an American court to admit black children. Thurgood Marshall, then director of the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund, or LDF for short, called it the first real victory in our campaign to destroy segregation. I spoke at Shirley's funeral. And she was buried at the Delaware Veterans Cemetery in Summit Bridge. I was speaking to her on the phone the night before she went into the hospital, having no idea. Under the leadership of Thurgood Marshall, the NAACP LDF enlisted the expertise of social scientists who had accumulated a body of knowledge on race in America by the time of the landmark court decision that overturned Plessy versus Ferguson. In Beulah versus Gebhardt and Belton versus Gebhardt, 1952, which were the school integration cases in Delaware, the LDF relied upon social science significantly more so than it did previously in the other cases. In the challenge to end segregated schools, the LDF lawyers in the Delaware cases mounted the heaviest socio-psychological evidence and testimony against Plessy to date. The social science evidence that they had accumulated clearly showed to them that even if equal, the intent of segregated education was to maintain the inferior status of African Americans. Thus, the damage to children's minds was the intended outcome of segregated education. In 1935, the NAACP hired Charles Houston, Dean of Howard University Law School, to lead the legal efforts. Houston hired his former law students like Thurgood Marshall, who took on segregated University of Maryland Law School that had denied him admission as his first challenge to segregation in education. In University versus Murray, 1936, Marshall argued, what's at stake here is more than the rights of my client. It's the moral commitment stated in our country's creed. By using the social sciences, the NAACP exposed the American dilemma, which was the promise of equality and justice for all, and the stark reality of racial segregation and discrimination against people of color that went against the national creed of the United States of America as the government of the people, by the people, for the people, established upon those principles of freedom, equality, justice, and humanity for which American patriots sacrificed their lives and fortunes. Literary scholar and native Delawarean J. Saunders Redding wrote in New Republic, America is free to choose whether the Negro shall remain her liability or become her opportunity. This was the American dilemma at the time of the school integration cases in South Carolina, Virginia, Topeka, Kansas, the District of Columbia, and Delaware, all basing their cases on the 14th Amendment, except for the District of Columbia, which had to use the 5th Amendment because the District of Columbia is not a state. The promise of equality in America faced the reality of segregation. The LDF concluded that separate but equal could never be equal. Through a focus on the psychological effect of state-sanctioned segregation, the LDF sought to establish that African Americans did not choose the badge of inferiority as the majority opinion in Plessy stated. We consider the underlying fallacy of the plaintiff Plessy's argument to consist in the assumption that enforced separation of the two races stamps the colored race with the badge of inferiority. If this be so, it is not by reason of anything found in the Act, but but solely because the colored race chooses to put that construction upon it. So the majority opinion in Plessy stated. The LDF argued to the contrary, that it was in fact the state that imposed the badge of inferiority upon people of color through state-sanctioned segregation laws. In Delaware, the legal basis for public school segregation lay within the Delaware Constitution of 1897. In Article 10, Section 2 of the Constitution, Delaware codified into law separate schools systems for African Americans and white students. It declared no distinction shall be made on account of race or color, and separate schools for whites and colored children shall be maintained. The LDF showed that that wasn't true. Plessy provided the legal framework for subsequent state constitutions like the Delaware Constitution. Throughout the 1940s, Marshall and his team of LDF lawyers challenged segregation, beginning with higher education. As we've heard, in Delaware, Jack Greenberg from the LDF joined Louis L. Redding, the only African American barred in Delaware at the time to challenge segregation at the undergraduate level at the University of Delaware, and won, resulting from a group of Delaware State College students who sued for admission into the school. They thought Delaware State College, now University, was on the verge of closing because of financial inequities. Collins cites Vice Chancellor ordered the immediate admission of African American students to the undergraduate programs at the University of Delaware. The court stated that the University of Delaware was a state agency. The University of Delaware argued it was private. Thus, the 14th Amendment applied. University of Delaware became the first Southern institution of higher education to desegregate all academic programs at the undergraduate level. It had already done so at the graduate level. This case convinced the NAACP that it was time to begin litigating cases at the primary and secondary public school level. In 1951, Louis Redding once again worked with Jack Greenberg to begin the challenge to public school segregation in Delaware. Based upon the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, the LDF challenged segregation in public education in Delaware in Belton versus Gebhardt, Claymont, Delaware, and Beulah versus Gebhardt, Hockessin, Delaware, 1952. The state, as we have heard, denied Sarah Beulah's request to provide her daughter transportation to segregated school for African Americans in Hockessin, or 107C, with C designating color. Shirley did not qualify because the distance between her house and Hockessin 107 was not great enough. Hence, it created a hardship for Sarah, who was unable to work, tend to her egg business, as we were discussing, during the day, because she had to drive Shirley to and from school. She had to be available at all times during the day, since she never knew when Shirley may be let out of school early because of inclement weather. She often had to endure hazardous driving conditions over steep and icy roads. She pointed out that a bus, as we've heard, drove past her house each day going to School 29, the white school. The State Board of Education operated the bus. So Shirley petitioned the Board of Education for her daughter to ride the bus to the school, 107C. Now, Dr. George R. Miller, Jr. was the state superintendent of public education at the time, and he responded to her request. recognizing, and I quote, "Bus transportation is an integral part of a school program," unquote. Nonetheless, he stated that since the state constitution requires separate educational facilities for colored and white children, your children may not ride on a bus serving white children. She then went to Lewis Redding, or Lawyer Redding as he was fondly called, for legal representation in securing bus transportation for her daughter. Redding responded that he would take on her case, but only to gain her admission into School 29. He told Shirley's mother that he refused to secure her daughter a ride on a Jim Crow bus to attend a Jim Crow school. That's a quote from Shirley to me. With this, Sarah Beulah agreed to sue for her daughter's admission into School 29. Two of the social scientists working with the LDF personally evaluated African American and white students from Delaware. They were Kenneth B. Clark and Frederick Wortham. Frederick Wortham tested students from Delaware 5 different times, along with the other social scientists in Delaware cases, agreed that the schools were unequal and could never be equal. Furthermore, even if they could theoretically become equal, there still would be psychological harm done to the children's mental health by state-imposed segregation. When asked if separate schools could ever be equal, expert witness in the Chancery Court, Frederick Wortham, provided a representative summary of the social scientist's testimony, stating, "If the state of Delaware would employ Professor Einstein to teach physics in marble halls to those children, I would still say everything I've said goes. It is a fact of segregation in general and the problems that come out of it that, to my mind, is anti-educational, since for a child, education is part of the mental health and not merely a question of learning something. State-sanctioned segregation produced a pathology of whiteness among white people too," Wortham concluded. He described the impact of segregated education like it was a foreign body that had infected them. Children had concluded in their minds that plain white Americans discriminate. Wortham pointed out that the state identifies itself with the most bigoted citizens when it created these segregation laws. Segregation leaves children with unresolved conflicts as to why they were being punished when they were following the rules. One African American girl said to Wortham, quote, "I don't particularly want to mingle with the white people since they have been prejudiced so long." In September 1951, using the doll test that Mamie Clark had developed, Kenneth Clark, her husband, tested 41 African American students at Howard High School in Wilmington, Delaware. Clark asked them, "Which of these dolls is likely to act bad?" He reported that 3/4 of the students chose the brown doll. He then asked them, "Show me which one is like you with a nice color and like better." All children chose the brown doll. Yet upon closer examination, Clark pointed out that 75% of the students indicated that the brown doll was most likely to act bad. Clark drew the conclusion, based upon what he saw as compelling evidence, that racial segregation is a symbol in the fact of institutionalized prejudice and institutionalized humiliation of these children impairs their functioning so long as the society in which they live and learn continues to segregate, humiliate, and reject them because of their race and color. Teachers in School 29 were responsible for 2 grades. In comparison, teachers in 107 during the court case were responsible for 3 grades. This meant that School 29 teachers dedicated half of their time to each class compared to 33.3% of dedicated time for each class in School 107. It also meant that of the 180 days in school year, students in School 107 received 60 days of instruction compared to students in School 29 that received 90 days of instruction. Now, this did not account for school closures due to inclement weather. Based upon average daily attendance, the state expended $137.22 for schools 107 per student compared to $178.13 per student at School 29. Hockessin 29 had 72.5% of the elementary pupils and consumed 84.6% of the total value of the school system budget. Hockessin 107C had 27% of the student population and spent the remaining 15.6% of the school system budget. Since its construction in 1922, School 107 had depreciated 39% in value, while School 29, having been built in 1932, appreciated 139%. Hockessin 107C lacked maintenance, partly attributed to having no full-time custodial staff and no proper supplies and equipment as compared to School 29. There was no landscaping at 107C versus, quote, beautiful, unquote, landscaping at School 29. There was no basement in 107C. Court testimony added that the drinking facilities did not meet national education and American Council on Education standards at 107C. Toilet facilities in 107C were in the closet that also contained cleaning supplies and the water bottles. There was no milk program and no refrigeration in 107C as there were in School 29. First aid equipment was inadequate in comparison to School 29, which had a nursing room. The conclusion was that state-sanctioned segregation interferes with the student learning process, resulting in the mental health disorders. Maurice E. Thomason, acting president of Delaware State College, said, quote, there is that area of stigma and insecurity that goes along with segregated schools, and no amount of superiority of equipment could erase it. He went on to say that whites in Delaware believe that, quote, the persons designated for the African-American, I put African-American schools, are not quite fit to go to the regular schools, unquote. The trial concluded with the state offering no witnesses and essentially mounting no defense against the arguments to end state-imposed segregation in public education. After having visited the school sites and hearing the expert testimony presented by plaintiffs, sites affirmed all but one of the plaintiffs' claims that the schools to be unequal. Most significantly, sites concurred that the LDF argument that state-sanctioned segregation in public schools damaged the mental health of the African-American children, seeing, quote, clear-cut, unquote, evidence of this produced by the inequities of the schools. This causes, quote, the Negro child to feel that he is inferior because, in an indirect fashion, the state has said so, Sykes wrote, and that such practices create a mental health problem in many Negro children with a resulting impediment to their educational progress. The state of Delaware Attorney General Alfred Young appealed to the Supreme Court of Delaware for reversal of the Chancery Court decision. The Delaware Supreme Court upheld the Chancery Court decision on all accounts. Then Young appealed the decision to the Supreme Court of the United States, the only state to do so because the LDF lost in the other areas. These combined into Brown versus Board of Education, Topeka, Kansas, 1954. Young appealed even though he offered no witnesses to support the state's defense of enforced public school segregation while in Delaware courts. Sites attributed this lack of defense to the outlandish nature of state-sanctioned segregation in public schools to the extent that Young could not defend it. Once in the U.S. Supreme Court, Young attacked Sites and his verdict, stating that the chancellor misunderstood the governing law when he ordered immediate integration rather than equalization for Hockessin, Claymont, and Howard schools in Delaware. Felix Frankfurter, Supreme Court Justice, responded, quote, "If I may say so, a chancellor who shows as much competence as this opinion shows probably can read the opinions of the court with understanding." We conclude that in the field of public education, the doctrine of separate but equal has no place. Separate educational facilities are inherently unequal. Therefore, we hold that the plaintiffs and others similarly situated for whom the actions have been brought are, by reason of the segregation complained of, deprived of the equal protection of laws guaranteed by the 14th Amendment, May 17, 1954. Frederick Wortham confidently concluded, quote, "The abolition of segregation in Delaware removes a handicap that interferes with the self-realization and social adjustment of the child. The much predicted ill effects of such a step did not occur. Although Wortham proclaimed all human beings have conflicts, but this particular one, state-sanctioned segregation, is artificial and unnecessary, and its relief evidently brings quick results." The highest court in the land recognized social science in footnote 11 of the Brown decision, declaring, quote, "This finding is amply supported by modern authority. With this, they rejected the findings of Plessy and whatever the extent of psychological knowledge at the time. Therefore, the court concluded that in the field of public education, the doctrine of separate but equal has no place." It went on to say, separate educational facilities are inherently unequal. And this is surely riding on the integrated bus to the newly integrated school. By and large, desegregation went smoothly in northern Newcastle County, unlike what was going to occur in Milford, Delaware. Mrs. Grace Moore changed her mind about segregation. As principal of Hockessin School number 29, she became convinced that integrated schools can operate smoothly. This compared to Miss A. Ethel Cheney, teacher at Hockessin, who was against integration. Quote, "I just believe that segregation is right," she declared, quote, "and not just in the schools, but throughout." After graduating from high school, Shirley went on to become a nurse in the military, where she met her future husband, Philip E. Stacks. They married, and when he retired, they moved to Maryland. He died in 1996, I believe, and she moved back to Delaware. She was ordained minister, and she was ordained as a minister in 1984 and was pastor of at least 4 different churches. The last, I believe, was St. James African Union Methodist Church in Wilmington. And with that, I want to congratulate the friends of Hockessin School 107 for your hard work and for having the newest National Park Service affiliated site in Brown cases in Hockessin. And I think mentioned number 29, and yeah, it should be added as well. And with that, I want to congratulate the friends of Hockessin 107. I want to thank the Historical Society of Delaware, and everyone for inviting me to speak here today. It's been my pleasure to honor a great Delawarean. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Skelcher. Next we have Sonny Knott, and we're all excited to hear what he's going to tell us. Sonny, there's very few people who actually knew Shirley other than her family members, actually knew and talked to Shirley and all that. So we're very fortunate to have Sonny with us today. Sonny was born in Washington, D.C., and I think Pete already told us that he lived with, or someone told us, that he lived with his uncle on Limestone Road. He went to Howard High School, and I asked Sonny, I said, Sonny, did you go from 6th grade, 6th grade all the way to Howard High School? Where's the middle school in that? And Sonny said, yeah, that's what we did. You know, that's what people did back in those days. So I said, oh, that's very interesting. Sonny worked, he worked a little bit with mushroom houses. He worked at DuPont, he worked at Veterans Hospital, he worked at Wilmington Trust, and he also joined the Army. Sonny Knott.
Thank you. I didn't know that. Good evening. Good evening to the Bueller family. I was honored to know your mother and your grandmother. I remember when Mrs. Bueller adopted me. And Mrs. Bueller and my mother were great friends. And I lived shortly from the church. Back during that time, the churches, especially the colored churches, had 2 and 3 services on Sunday. So sometimes Mrs. Bueller would not go back home all the way to Limestone Road. She would come to my mother's house with Cheryl. And they would sit on the porch and chew the fat until it was time to go back to service. So it's my honor to be here. Thank you so much for taking time out to come. Good evening. I am, as you know by now, Sonny Knott. I went to the 107C school. Very few was left. In fact, when my friend David said, come to me, he said, we're going to refurbish the school. We're going to do this, we're going to do that, change this, do all that. I said, yeah, right. But I did say this to David. I'm 92 years old. Wow. So don't be too long. Because I would love to see it. And you get an opportunity to go down to the school. They're doing a marvelous job. I was down there Monday and it was fantastic. But anyway, I started the Hockessin Juneteenth school in 1937. As was told you, I was born in Washington, D.C., which is like Wilmington from Hockessin. On to go to the hospital, and I was immediately back in the country again. My father decided to move us to Delaware in 1937. I lived with my uncle on Bueller land. Mr. Bueller had a small farm, cows and chickens and things he had. In fact, Mrs. Bueller had an egg business. He had about 5 or 6 houses on his land. I don't know where they're not. Great man. But anyway, when I got to the 107C, don't you forget that C. 107 you can find anywhere, but that C is the whole impact of that school. Mrs. Bojan was the teacher there. It was a one-room building, probably could get in here, but for 2.5 times, David, could get inside here right now, probably, maybe 2 times. Mrs. Bojan lived in Wilmington, and she came, she was a faithful teacher. There was 6th grade in that one room, 6 rows of seats. 1st grade, 2nd grade, 3rd grade, and so forth. And when you got over here to 6th grade, you graduated. You was headed for big time. You went to Howard High School, went to Delaware, 14th and Poplar. We didn't have any buses that you heard them say. We rode the public bus. The state would send my mother a book of tickets, and you got on a bus called the Short Line. It was the public bus that ran all day long in a big circle. Wilmington, Mendenhall, Kennedy Square, York Lynn, Hockessin, and Wilmington, all day long, every 2 hours. We got on the bus, regardless of the weather. And back during that time, we had winters. We had winters. We got a little dusting now. They threatened us to run out and buy milk and cheese and everything. But it don't mean nothing. Back then, there was nothing we wanted to. There was snow and those who had cars that put chains on. But we got on the bus there at 11th and French. And we had to walk down to 14th and Poplar at Howard High School, commonly known as Howard, the Rare Center now. Regardless of the weather, we had that long walk. But I listened to them talk and the buses and the distance. Everyone that went to the school where I was, we all walked. There was a family, I know they walked at least 2 miles per day. It was a Taylor family, they lived down in Mountain View. And back then, like I said, there was nothing to have a foot of snow. So they had that long way, and sometimes they wouldn't get to the school till around 10 o'clock. Now, Mrs. Bojan, she always drove big fancy cars. If any of you know what a Packard is, that $5 car. She drove that Packard, and sometimes she would be late coming to school. I live right there what's called Archie's Mushroom House office now. That's where I was raised up. And I'd be home. I said, no school today. I got it made. And my mother would see, it might be 10 or 10:30. Miss Bojan got there in this big Packard. My mother would say, get your coat. Miss Bojan just went down and got to go to school. I thought I had it today off. She was a great teacher. She taught us everything that she knew, all during the hardship of less material. We didn't, as it was mentioned, wasn't afforded all of the supplies and things that the white school had on the hill. We did our work on the blackboard, or we would stand up in front of the class and read. If she told you, say, well, James, that was my name at the time. James, read page 3 and 4. Okay, I'm a smart guy. So I would start reading. I'd read page 3, I go to page 4, it wouldn't be there. Why? Because we never got new books. We got the better books from 29. 29 got the new books. I know that a lot of supplies we had, Mrs. Bojan bought out of her salary because she wouldn't get the support. It was nothing for us to have a short piece of chalk which she broke in half to make it last. I have a pencil. Pages out of the books. We did everything on the blackboard, and sometimes the blackboard would have holes in them because they were old. They weren't smooth. Lost, you still here?
I'm here.
She'll back me up on this.
I got you back.
We got everything second. Nothing new. We had a setup for our activities. We had a set of swings and a set of seesaws. If the swing broke, they stayed broke. The maintenance man never came to our school. Sometimes the fathers in the community would feel sorry for us and come and fix the swings. We improvised everything we did. I'm going to share something with you. I shared at the last gathering. We used to have little plays. Little plays we had, and that was an exciting time. And I remember this particular year, Mrs. Bojan put in, right after Thanksgiving, she put in this huge piece of cardboard. And she took some of her oldest boys, I was one of them at the time. For 3 weeks, we painted, after the chief turned us loose, and we would go up and start painting this thing. We made a fireplace out of it. Little red bricks, white for mortar. We finally got this fireplace made for Christmas. Come Christmas, time for the play. We was all excited. I worked all these 3 weeks to paint this fireplace, painted little poinsettias on it. We did a fantastic job. My mother and father were there. All you guys were there for the play. But the guy named Charles Dobson, we called him Bubby, he had been picked to be Santa Claus. That's okay. Mrs. Bojan ran a string or wire or something all the way across the room. I guess she brought some of her sheets from home, put up a curtain. We were fantastic. We had a playhouse right there. Time comes for play. Now, as you know, Santa Claus always says 3 ho-hos. Ho, 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 Merry Christmas. Time for the play. But we got, I don't know how they had it back. I don't know if he was on the ladder or a bucket. I don't know what puppy was on. But I think he got 2 ho-hos out and lost his balance. You know the rest of the story. Down to the curtain, everything. 3 weeks of work gone. Now, they say Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas means laughter. It was a Merry Christmas that night. Because when that thing fell down, everybody laughed. But that's the way we were. That's why that school is so important to us. Little things like that, the kids don't have today. I volunteer at Belcastle School. I've been there for 21, 22 years. And the kids there, I try to tell them to appreciate what you have. Because we didn't. You got fancy computers and all this stuff and telephones, all of them got telephones in there. But we had none of that. But what we had was love. Excuse me. Our teachers, when I went to Howard School, I thought they were the meanest teachers God ever put to rest. I said, they hate us. Why? But they didn't. They taught us. Get yourself together. Put them down. They were preparing us for what they knew we had to face out in that world. A lot of things that you spoke on, we had to face that. Segregation was a horrible thing. We couldn't go to the movies. We couldn't go to the restaurants. I played with you all day long. I was in and out of your house all day long. So it was time to go to school. But you know what? It didn't bother us because we didn't realize what the word segregation meant. We didn't realize that. We didn't know we were being segregated against. My cousin lived in Landenberg, right over the line in Delaware, right over the line. We went to school in Kennett Square. We were always consolidated. Delaware was strictly segregated. It was very, very damaging once we realized what was going on. So I'm happy that The Historical Society is reversing that building. Because that building means so much to us. There's not that many of us left now. We run out of time. But I think God is going to bless me. I'm 92 years old. I don't mind saying it. A lot of people don't make it as, so don't hide it. Be proud of it. But I'm 92, but I'm waiting for that day. When we can walk. It's what's wrong with you?
It's okay.
When we can walk through that door. One more time.
Amen.
The 107C. Lost
Yes.
and all the rest of us. We're going to hold our heads up high and walk through that door. I'm finished. God bless each and one of you. Thank you for coming. If you have any questions, I'll try to do my best to answer. If not, I'll turn the program back over to the gentleman.
Now, do we have any questions?
When did the school actually close? 107C.
I think 4 or 5 days, I think when the school finally closed. Because see, they started integrating the students a long time after I left. But I left a long time. But lost them. They was involved in the integration, going up on the hill and what have you. But and I think I was down 54, 55. I think. I really don't know for sure.
Okay, is there another question in the house? Yes, ma'am.
Well, I'm curious what happened to the excellent teachers like Mrs. Bojan, right? So they weren't, I'm assuming weren't given positions in the integrated schools. And so that's part of the story that is sad and often untold. What happens to those wonderful teachers?
Well, what happened to those wonderful teachers? Don't forget, those teachers was older than me. So I would well imagine the Lord don't call them home.
Did they lose their jobs then? The schools closed, right?
Well, they were integrating other schools. Some of them left the job because, my understanding, some of the white teachers did not want to teach us. They didn't want to be bothered with us, so I guess they went somewhere else in another direction.
Delaware schools were finally considered fully desegregated in 1967 by the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Education. That didn't leave Wilmington, though. That's a whole different story. Howard Rao was in charge. He was deputy superintendent of public instruction in the 60s when they were going through moving teachers, and all the teachers were placed. Principals, however, the administrators, it's a whole different story, and did not receive, people transfers over to particular positions. And that's still a major issue.
Mr. Saunders?
Yeah, I was curious. C.J. Sykes, the chancellor, his decision, it went to the Supreme Court of Delaware and was upheld there. All the other cases within the Brown versus Board of Education group, it is the only one where the state actually supported the decision by the lower court. Am I correct?
Yes.
Excuse me?
It's the only state where the state Supreme Court
Yes.
supported the lower
Yes,
court
yes, yes,
decision.
yes, yes. It's the only state that had to appeal. I mean, they didn't have to appeal, but they chose to appeal to the Supreme Court. So they were, it was a flip on the LDF lawyers in the other cases where they lost all of those cases.
How big an issue was that when it went to the Supreme Court under Brown?
It was, as you heard, the argument was that Chancellor Sykes didn't understand the Constitution. And Frankfurter says, I think with that decision that he wrote, he well understands the lower court's decisions on yes.
Could you speak in the mic? We can't hear you.
So I think the uniqueness of the Delaware decision was based on the fact that we have a court of chancery, which most states don't have. The court of chancery is based on equity, not necessarily civil rights, which is why our case was so important in that whole decision.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, when it was decided the chancery courts would take the Beulah and Dalton cases, Jack Greenberg was a little shocked because he was expected to go through a regular course, but this was the best scenario for their case because of the court of equity. And,
Excuse me again. David?
Yes.
Would I be embarrassing you to ask you to come and talk about the progress of the school?
No. It'd be a pleasure. Thank you. I know. Hi, everyone. My name's David Wilk, and I am a Delaware native who grew up here. I'm currently a professor at Temple University. I am the director of the real estate program at the Fox School of Business, and I'm also a real estate advisor. So I do appraisals and consulting for real estate. And 10 years ago, I got a call from Judge Joshua Martin, who was a former Superior Court judge at Dr. Skelcher's pleasure to meet you tonight. And we are. I'm so blown away that you all came in tonight to join us. I can't tell you how excited and honored we are to meet you. And you did a beautiful job with your essay, so thank you so much. And 10 years ago, I was called by Judge Martin, and he said, we might need someone with real estate experience to help us figure out what to do with a school in Hockessin. And I said, gosh, that's... And he and I worked together very closely with the Wilmington Renaissance Corporation in downtown Wilmington, and I got to know him and love him. And I basically said, Josh, anything that you ask me to do, the answer is always going to be yes. So he said, so let me tell you a few more details. And I said, okay. He said, this school is the site of one of the 5 cases that became Brown versus Board of Education. And I said, and what's the name of the school? He goes, Hockessin Colored School number 107. And I said, Josh, I can't believe there's a place that is named Hockessin Colored School number 107. I grew up in Delaware. I went to public school in Delaware. No one ever taught me about it. I've been practicing real estate for over 40 years. I've driven by this building hundreds of times in my travels and never knew of its historical significance. And I said, holy cow, this is incredible. And so I got involved originally when the property was about to go to sheriff's sale because there were unpaid mechanics liens on the property. And we were able to work closely with the Hockessin Community Center to invite members of the center onto our board. We formed a nonprofit. See, so you asked the wrong person to come up, Sonny, so I can talk to them. But we formed a nonprofit, and the nonprofit was really started by Judge Leonard Williams, the late Leonard Williams, God rest his soul, and C.J. Seitz, and in the picture that Dr. Skelcher put up there in the Oval Office when we signed the bill for the National Park site, to the far right on that picture is Chancellor Seitz's son, C.J., who is currently the Chief Justice of the Delaware Supreme Court today. So talk about chills and serendipity. And so C.J. and Tony Allen, who's the president of Delaware State University, and Josh Martin and Fred Sears, who was chairman of the Delaware Community Foundation at the time, and Dick Christopher and Sylvia Banks from DuPont, they formed a 501c3 or nonprofit so that we could figure out a way to save the school and to make sure that its history and its significance and monumental history in our nation is never lost for future generations. So that began my journey 10 short years ago. But what was most interesting about the time that we spent is that it wasn't, what we wound up starting to do is there were a bunch of other colored schools that were built by Pierre S. DuPont around the state of Delaware. So we started, because I'm a market researcher, we started doing our homework. And we went around and looked at Buttonwood School, and we looked at Booker T. Washington School in Newcastle, and we went to Iron Hill. But in between that time period, we had this amazing gift. And the amazing gift was we got to meet and get to know all of the former students from the school, starting with Sonny and, God rest their souls, Jean and Robert Fleming, and Miss Lois, and Sonny's sisters, Blanche and Charlotte, and Charlie Johnson, and Robert Berry, and Leroy Peterson, and we got to meet everybody, and we all of a sudden realized we have this ominous responsibility. And the responsibility is we have to figure out what to do with this school, with this property, to make sure, A, this never happens to anyone else again in the future, and that we have to do something. We don't want to just make it into a museum where people come and look and say, oh, this is what happened, and we don't really need to come back anymore. What we wanted to do is we wanted to create a lifestyle connectivity between the school and the community forever. And it was kind of like, where can we create the greatest impact, the greatest future value, and the greatest community benefit from this place? And so during our journey, I look around the room. We got to meet Darlene and members of the Hockessin Historical Society, and God rest his soul, Joe Lake, and all the effort. And we met Pete recently, and then I look in the back, and we have Councilwoman Janet Kilpatrick, who from day one has said, whatever you need, I'm in. I'll help to figure out what we can do. But we really struggled for many years, and this is the point of the story. We struggled because it took from 2012 to 2015 to work through the issues of getting the property permanently preserved in the ownership of our nonprofit. And in June of 2015, so really 7 years ago, we were able to effectuate an amicable transfer of the property into the 501c3. And then we all kind of looked at each other and said, okay, now what? We have to tell the story of what happened here, but what about the future? And so we really almost, and I liken this to almost like Moses wandering in the desert before reaching the promised land. We struggled, and we said, what are we going to do? And in 2019, our board ratified an idea to turn the school into a center for diversity, inclusion, and social equity. That was our concept. And then all of a sudden, the world went crazy in 2020, and we looked at each other, and we looked up, and we said, thank you for your divine guidance in allowing us to figure out how do we really honor the memory of Shirley, and how do we honor the memory of Sarah and Fred, and Lewis Redding, and Judge Colin Seitz, and Thurgood Marshall, and all of the incredible people who I'm sure I'm missing. but all the people that really, we stand on their shoulders today of doing this. And so being able to create the center, we finally have our validation in 2020. And then we were able, thanks to our relationship with Janet, Councilwoman Kilpatrick, we wound up meeting with the county executive, Matt Meyer, who all of you met tonight and saw. And we were able to create a partnership between the Friends of Hockessin Colored School 107 and the county to become the 250th park in the county system. And also for the county to truly become a partner of ours, because the money that we use to pay off the mechanics liens and to be able to keep the property from going to sheriff's sale came from, a large part of it came from the African American Empowerment Fund, which put up $100,000, and we were able, with the county's help, as all volunteers, we're all volunteers, to pay off the African American Empowerment Fund and to basically go forward with the county. And since that county announcement, and really that, things have just taken off. And so I'd like to invite all of you to come see the school. We basically took the school and we're in the process of transforming it into the center. We are about 75% of the way there with our construction. We were able to fund, we didn't even do a formal capital campaign. We were able to create, we received $1 million from the state of Delaware bond bill. We asked for $500,000, they gave us $1 million. We were able to get $250,000 grant from Longwood Foundation, and here another chill and serendipity, Pierre S. DuPont, who built the school 102 years ago, founded the Longwood Foundation, and here they are, our partners in the transformation to the center. And then the last piece was we've had incredible support from our congressional delegation, which is Senator Chris Coons and Senator Tom Carper and Representative Lisa Blunt Rochester. And they were able to get us a $750,000 appropriation from Congress this past year. And so we've raised $2 million to transform the school into the center. And we do have a website, and I'm sorry for taking so long, I apologize, but I thought it would be great to take the past and melt with the future. And we expect to, if everything goes well and supply chain doesn't really mess us up, we should be able to get a certificate of occupancy sometime in mid-August of this year. So we're right around the corner. And you heard Sonny, and just to tell you, all of our board members and all of us involved in the Friends, we've fallen in love with all of the former students that went to the school, and we have become dear friends and brothers and sisters with each other. And the culmination was the picture that Dr. Skelcher wrote. We became a national park on May 12th of this year. So now the school will be permanently preserved and be a national park affiliate site under Brown v. Board of Education. Now I just want to introduce one of our other board members, Dr. Ray Blackwell, who is Chief of Cardiac Surgery at Christiana Care Health Systems and has been an incredible contributor to our success as well, along with Dr. Lynette Edwards, who unfortunately could not be here tonight. She's going to be really upset that she missed tonight. But we're hoping you'll stay in town for a couple of days and we'll get a chance to show you the school and kind of the construction process. And most importantly, and I'll forgive you, but there's really 4 pillars to what we're going to do at the center. Number one, we're going to make sure that not one high school or middle school student goes through public schools and private schools in Delaware without knowing the story of what happened in Claymont and what happened in Hockessin and how that became Brown v. Board of Education. It's embarrassing that it's not being taught in our curriculum right now. And thanks to all of everyone's efforts to do that. Secondly, we're going to create the school and the center will become a place where we can have civil, safe conversations in hallowed ground around contemporary social issues that we're really not doing a very good job of solving right now, and that we need a lot of help and a lot of collaboration. So that would be number two. Number three is we have programs set up for teaching cultural competency. How do we all get along? How do we talk to each other? How do we embrace and empathize with each other's differences, whatever they are? Race, ethnicity, gender, disability, age, religion, whatever it is, culture, we have to learn how to be more culturally competent. And we're certainly seeing that now as people go back to work and the workforce is changing so much today. And then the fourth area is something that's going to be really the essence of innovation, which is what we call social infrastructure. Okay? Inequity and a lack of equality and social equity is still a major problem in our country. There's huge gaps in education and access. Social infrastructure is affordable housing, education, healthcare, food security, entrepreneurship, inclusive economic development, public safety, social justice, and other things. And if you think about infrastructure, everybody just kind of thinks, oh, that's bridges and roads, right? Well, think of the definition of infrastructure from Oxford Dictionary is frameworks and systems that lead to the optimization and operation of a society. And social infrastructure is the second largest category. And so we're going to be a think tank where people are going to come there. We've got Delaware State as a partner. We've got Temple University as a partner, University of Delaware as a partner, Johns Hopkins as a partner, Christiana Care as a partner, Highmark. So we're really in the process now of creating programming partnerships and benefit partnerships with everyone in the community that wants to be a part of this so that we can truly be transformational. And not just talk the talk, but walk and make it happen. And thanks to the blessing of Sonny and Miss Lois and all the former students and the Beulah family and your generosity of sharing your story and experiences with us, we are really going to do something special in the future. And the only thing that we're living for now is what Sonny said in ending his comments, which is we have to get the students to walk back through the door again as soon as possible. So, thank you all. Did Thomas also?
Yeah, I did have a question. What I heard Mr. Knott say tonight just absolutely blew me away. It blew me away. And I am hoping that somebody is catching these oral histories and they're capturing them and taking them down so that we can hear these stories, because that's what's going to bring that building alive, is remembering those stories. So if there's somebody who is working to get these oral histories taken care of, because I hope you live for another 10, 20 years.
I would do.
Yeah? But the facts are that we got to capture this oral history while we have it and while it's fresh in your mind. Because I got to tell you, I'm going to remember that story for the rest of my life. Every time I hear ho, 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 I'm So thank you for sharing that.
No, that's a great point. I mean, we've been capturing hours of video. We have our website. Our website is HockessinColoredSchool107.org. And we have a lot of content on our website right now, including Mr. Leroy, Miss Lois, and Mr. Sonny. We all did podcasts with NPR, National Public Radio, and we have a ton of different videos, but to your point, we need to do more. That's really on our, we have a sound studio that we've designed into the center so that we'll be able to do national podcasts and other types of content, but we need to do more of that. You're absolutely right. And Lynette, Dr. Edwards, and I just met for 2.5 hours today, and we talked about the fact that we need to have videography out the gazoo, so to speak, to capture this, because this is priceless. So thank you for that. And anyone that you know that has a passion for videography or anything like that, this is a community effort. It's open arms, anyone that wants to contribute is wholeheartedly welcome. Yes, sir.
Dave, Dick Clark.
Dick.
We know each other from way
Yes.
back, but, in the beginning, too, when you were doing
The Beulah Heritage Trail.
Got it.
Yes.
I just want to comment on the oral history that there are grants that you can get through the Park Service and through other components of the federal government for actual capturing oral history. And what I'm going to take this to the Smithsonian in addition to that.
We want to get 60 minutes. We think this is a 60-minute story. Yep, to interview Mr. Sonny and Ms. Lois and the other students and the family. We really do. This has been missed, and the story needs to be told. So we would love that. Yes, sir.
Is this going to be Delaware's first national park?
I don't think it'll be a first national. I don't know if it'll be a first, maybe second. It's
Trek on, is it? It was Trek on the state?
Yeah.
Lake is a national wildlife preserve.
Yeah, it's over by Beaver Valley. There's a national park area around Beaver Valley. But we're going to be, what we're referring to is, and what the president signed, was the Brown v. Board of Education national affiliate sites. And so we're part of Kansas, South Carolina, Virginia, DC, and Delaware. And it was a huge, incredible opportunity to do that. And it was only a month ago, so, which is really exciting. So thank you, Sonny, for the opportunity, and we welcome, Pete and Darlene. Tomorrow, we would be available to take people through the school. If you're going to stay, we would love for you to see it. We have our contractor has been EDIS. Our architect is Architectural Alliance, Kevin Wilson and Torin Williams. And we're working very closely with Ms. Lynette, Dr. Lynette, with Mitchell Associates on doing the interior and telling the story. And we can't wait to unveil what we've done, because it's been a labor of love, and it's turned into a blessing beyond anything that I've done in my lifetime, because of the impact and just the heart and feeling around it. So, and Sonny, every time he speaks, I'm beyond moved. So we call him and Miss Lois and the students national treasures. So thank you all very much. Any other questions? Thank you, Darlene. I think you're just on time.
Just on time. Thank you for coming out tonight, and we will be having another Juneteenth next year this time, so please join us then. Good night.
And I didn't realize that. So that became my church when I was at Hockessin. My parents. So God bless. Thank you so much.
That was
Yes, great.
Oh, Messiah.
So now that is what, 4 generations? She used to type in the whole family, the whole family.
Oh,
I have a way that I talked with somebody about an idea that we have, so I'm bouncing a couple ideas around, but I want those all, I want those all, because we've got to get it. Absolutely.
Yes, we are. Yes, as you say, to see this day long, having it in this day. I'm 82 years old, Lois Johnson. Yes, it's really not what it's good for. I'm going to live with children.
I bet you never forgot it after that.
Oh, no, I did not.
Exactly.
No, I did not, but
Here's how to remember it. That's what it was. Where are we going to put it? Exactly. Nice to meet you.
My sister and I followed her after that. Mine was wonderful. When I found out she became a minister, I said, yeah, that's like her. Yes. Wonderful. Do you have a number or something I can?
Unless you don't want to talk to you later.
Yeah, she did. Oh, are you there? Oh, yeah, I do. Yeah, okay, then I will. I just pulled out that picture because I wanted to show them that when he said that things because of this osmosis, and my picture is on his computer, and they had
The valley is the next one. So if you go down,
What's her name? Yes, I'm sorry. That's something to say.
and
Get a chance to say everything that you said? No? You're beautiful, you know that? How are you? You've done good. You've done a good job. That was really well done. How are you? That was so great. It was wonderful. It's amazing.
I'm in high school, so I have exams, and I got to pick a topic, and my mom went with me the Brown Versus Board of Education. So I already had it, and my grandma, I made her read it, and she was very proud of me, and she was like,
Well, I'll tell you what, I went to law school and I give you A+. There you go. There you go. Absolutely. There you go. All right, Jen, and I'm out of here. All right, see you. Take care, doctor. Anyway. Take care, Professor. Thank you so much. Really well done. Nice to meet you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
I remember some of this stuff. That's the scary part. That's the scary part. I went to Fred Wallace and that was one of the, so that's where I went to school. And my teacher was
We haven't, I know that.
memory when I did it, just the weirdest thing she did. And I looked at that, we're so close in history. It just really, people don't realize how close we are in history. And I don't even know if that's even possible. I looked at it and I looked at the timeline. Yes, it is. It's possible. I think Harry don't like 1910.
You can go for a sandwich.
Yes, you did.
So they're getting ready. I told Greg So he's done.
So, well, it's the crazy. Now,
I was stunned.
I know, but I remember. You're old. I'm not remember. I remember.
As optimistic as we can be. Well, you're going forward,
Yeah, yes, you're right. And then, even until I remember.
My mom can.
It's great fun too.
Yes, I will. Okay.
Is your mom doing it?
Oh, okay, all right.
I can kind of remember a lot of things about it, but now I'm not that old that I remember. Yeah, actually, you know, it's so close. I'm running for the state senate, so I'm in the middle of the state senate, right? So I'm meeting a lot of the senate district. This would be part of my district. So I'm running right now.
That she used to say to me, she was like, and she said, and I don't want to see you. So, and I was moving from but I got to behind everything, just bringing all of that to our family.
It's okay. It's I'm one is Republican here. And he knows it. It's a numbers game right now. And I think I am too. That's what I've been told. And you know who's been telling me to do that? It's my grandma. I know that. I know that. But the fact is, I knows the numbers. Okay, Mike is good. No, he's not good. Mike is Mike.
Send me your contact
Oh my God, so sorry. Yes, yes. And listen, God bless you.
I'm going to be at
But then you wait to me, because Mike said, I know that was
1:30, so tomorrow, it's like 2 o'clock. 2 o'clock.
wait for the same.
2 o'clock. That would be fantastic.
You guys,
My mother's sister.
I don't have to. If I can, I will, yes.
the fact is, it all of you somebody's all private, who hasn't seen like that.
But I don't know, I he went to March too. I know, that's another one you're talking about. The same.
My daughter's.
Well, no.
No, yeah. No, it's great.